everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you might be joining us from in the world today. My name is Meg Alexander. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And if you want a visual descriptor, I am a 39-year-old woman with pink, purple, and blue hair, blue glasses, and a black sweatshirt. I am incredibly honored and excited to get to introduce all of you to the team from Esri. But before we dive in, I just want to say hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our November summit. We are talking about supporting veterans, active service members, and military spouses. Now, my conversation with the Esri team coming up, we're going to be talking mission career transition, translating your military experience for civilian success, an issue that is, as somebody who is a wife of a former Army vet, is very close to my own heart as well. Now, we're going to be talking about making the transition from military to civilian employment and how to translate your military experience into language that resonates with private sector employees. All right, y'all, I'm very excited to introduce my speakers and get y'all started. But before we do, I just wanted to say hello and welcome to the Esri team. We've got Josh, Greg, and Matt here today. We're all very excited to share their experiences with you. Now, as we go through today's event, they are each here to share firsthand advice to help anyone, especially service members and veterans, looking to make a career change. All right, now I'm very excited to dive in on questions, especially very excited to start discussing some effective ways to translate military roles and responsibilities into language that resonates with civilian employers. A lot of times, guilty as charged, we don't understand the language y'all are speaking. For example, there can sometimes be a disconnect between military language and more private sector or corporate language, even though the general idea might be the same. Matt, do you have any advice for people that are trying to make this initial translation from their previous experience in the military world into civilian society?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to simplify it. While there is, there's military language, there's different corporate lingo that you'll learn when you're in the corporate world. But when you're talking to somebody in an interview, you're writing out a resume, think of it like, how would I explain this to my grandmother? Is kind of how I usually like to approach it. If I can explain a complicated technical thing I did to somebody that's never experienced it before, then I'm getting the point across. So my first deployment into Afghanistan, I led a mine clearing platoon, and my squad leaders were out there doing, leading their teams every day. And instead of saying I led a mine clearing unit in combat, I managed a project site every day. Things that people can equate to some experience they've had before. So I would say simplify it. Don't use excessive language, excessive adjectives. You're not writing an award for yourself. You're just trying to convey your experience. And your experience generally is impressive enough without having to try to embellish it or make it seem like it's more than it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Matt, apologies. I meant to ask each of you this, but would you mind telling us a little bit about your background, what connects you to today's discussion topic?
So I was a captain in the Army. I got out in 2007. I was an engineer. I did a lot of work in the field as a demining platoon leader and in OEF 4 and 5. And then I also worked some staff positions in the planner shop as well as an engineer operations officer in OEF 7. And I learned a lot of skills there that thankfully transitioned directly to the job I'm in now.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that with us. All right. Now, one of the things that I feel like a lot of military personnel might overlook is there are some military acquired skills that tend to be incredibly valuable and can be very much overlooked by private sector companies. How do you think candidates should be highlighting these skills in their resumes and interviews? Let's see. Let's go with Matt to this one first.
So I think obviously leadership's the easy one. Leadership is a very, very simple thing that you're doing from the time that have 5 minutes in the military to just about the end. But I would go with critical thinking rather than leadership as something that I'd want to highlight. I think if anyone's watching this who is transitioning knows the experience of being given a task that you have absolutely no idea how to do, and you're just told to figure it out. And there's not a procedure, or you're doing it for the first time, and it's just the way you approach things, and you're just used to it. You are given an impossible task and you just have to figure it out. In the regular civilian world, in the corporate world, a lot of time you have procedures and you have different policies on how you do things, and there's not as much of that just figure it out for the first time. So when you do run across those things, it's a very valuable skill to have. So I would highlight your ability to think critically, think on your feet, and to adapt to new situations.
That's a really good one. I think you're right. I think that is something that can very easily feel like kind of a given, not necessarily a given, but like something that people feel like they should brag about something else, I guess. And I think that you're right. That is a very, very, very valuable one. I do want to open the floor, Greg or Josh. Would either of y'all like to go and tell us a little bit about what connects you to the material before we ask y'all a bunch of questions as well? Greg, do
Sure,
you want
I'll
to
go
start us
real
off?
quick. So, hi, yeah, my name's Greg Tenori. I was in the Army for 22 years. I started off my first 6 years as a field artilleryman, and then I changed MOSs in late 1999 to become a geospatial engineer and retired as a master sergeant. Like Matt, I've been deployed to Iraq 3 times, starting in OIF 2, and then back in '08 to 9, and then 11 to 12. So yeah, that's sort of me. I've been at Esri about 5 years now. I did the defense contracting thing when I first got out in 2015, and then I started here with Esri in 2020. So that's what got me all the way here.
Very nice. Thank you, Greg. And Josh, how about you? What's your background?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Gomez. I'm an advisor with Esri. I've been with Esri for a couple of years now. I think I started in 2021. But before that, I was in the military with the 82nd Airborne Division over in North Carolina. So hello to all of my airborne folks. Appreciate your service. So I was there for 5 years in infantry for a while, and then I transitioned out of the military as a National Guard member, and I'm currently still serving in the National Guard for the California. And I work in the intelligence community now. So I've been there for about 10 plus years. So it's a very small world. So I think Matt and Greg probably attest to this. You're going to run into your folks while working at Esri, or you're a civilian. You're going to run into them all the time. It happens. It's a small world. So happy to be here, and thank you.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Now, Matt, you had touched on the fact that a lot of veterans bring extensive leadership experience. Not just being empowered to think on your feet, but sometimes being empowered to be in charge of other people. How can they communicate that effectively to hiring managers, especially those who are unfamiliar with military hierarchy? I understand someone has more fruit salad on their chest, then they're probably more in charge. But if you are similarly completely blind to the military hierarchy, like I am, how can you explain that? Let's see, Greg, do you want to start us off, and then Matt will go to you?
Yeah, sure. Like Matt was saying, if you're getting ready to get out and you're transitioning, were able to conform to Army lifestyle. So you sort of have to change and get used to being out of the military, and the ability to adapt and overcome that all soldiers and service members are taught um, are key in the civilian world. But like you're saying, they don't understand the structure, so they're not going to understand terms like squad and team or section and platoon. So you have to do a little bit of homework and research what the equivalent is. So if I said a squad, that's like an 8 to 10 person cross project functionality lead, or a platoon is like a small department head. So you have to find language that is common to the civilian world. And one of the best things that I did when I got out and was working on my resume was had different people, pure civilians, read my resume over and see where they would stumble and ask questions. And I knew those were areas that I needed to, get rid of an acronym or stop using adjectives to make one thing sound great with 40 words that could have been three. So you just have to find the language that the civilians speak in. And the best way to do that is to ask some pure civilians to look at your things and see what they think of it and give you feedback.
I really appreciate your example too, of like the platoon of like, okay, that's 8 to 10 people. Okay, that's
Mhm.
way more, I can, you say platoon to me and I'm just like, lots of
Yep.
people? Enough to fill an aircraft carrier? I don't know. So I think that's great. I really appreciate that. And I also very much appreciated your call out of like, some of your teams are going to be self-contained. Some of them you will be liaising with other teams who you are not in control or in charge of. So that is very, very valuable information. And like you said, kind of brings a little bit more clarity to the power structure that you were working within. And there's a lot of times that people have to make these kind of translations depending on, if you're transitioning industries. So it's not just military to civilian, but I do think it is something that, like, terminology wise, is very, very translation heavy if you're moving from military to civilian life. So I think that's wonderful. Matt, what are your feelings on this? How do you think veterans can convey that extensive leadership experience with managers or hiring people who are not familiar with military life?
Well, I'm definitely going to agree with Greg on what he said. And really, I think it is about just trying to distill down what you did to its core components and think about, you know, not the terms, but what was the actual capability. Well, you led 5 people, you led 8 people, trying to compare that to something that exists outside. If you start going through job applications, you'll see different positions will have different requirements and expectations, and you can start drawing a line. If you see that a project manager is expected to lead a team of 5 people, you know that you have some comparable experience if you were a team leader or squad leader or something like that. So I would say, if you can kind of try to draw those parallels between jobs that you're looking at and things that you've done, and just try to use that language that you see online in those job applications instead of what you're used to. And it takes a little bit of time, but it'll get the point across.
Yeah, I like that. And actually, I just realized I never came circle back to this, but Greg, I loved your advice to have like a pure civilian read over your resume. Because there might be, kind of not necessarily even stumbling blocks, but like, I'm not sure what that word means. And you want to make this like the easiest read possible for every hiring manager, everybody that picks up your resume. So I think that's
Right.
wonderful advice. I really appreciate that advice there.
I think sometimes service members want to stress that they're a former service member. And I would say you don't have to do that. They're going to see that in your resume. So they're going to know. So you don't have to, every block doesn't have to have you were in the army. You can soften it a little bit. They got it. They know it's in there. So,
Yeah. Well, and I think, granted, this is a bit of a tangent, but psychologically, I remember what it was like when my husband got out of the military, and he did something similar to Josh. He went from the Army into the National Guard for Ohio, and then transitioned out fully that way. And I remember him getting out and feeling pretty down on himself for a while because he had status in the military. He knew what he was doing. He was part of a team. He had proved himself. Like, they knew him at the airbase, like all that kind of stuff. So like I think it was a really knee-jerk reaction when he first got out to kind of keep highlighting, like, no, I do know my things, because you're suddenly in a world where none of the skills that not none a lot of the skills that you developed are no longer something that is like really driving your life or is really helping you out. And so I think it's totally understandable how we use 4 words when one would do. That's a hard spot to be in mentally. Like, job hunting is not fun to begin with.
right.
So yeah, I think that's a really important thing to not overlook, that extra layer of like kind of wear and tear on
Anxiety,
the person.
angst,
Yeah.
uncertainty, nervousness, depression, anxiety. It's all there when you get out, because whether you serve 4 years or 22, you are changing environments, and it is sort of like, wow, what on paper, what am I? When it gets whittled down to that, where in your military career you were surrounded by people who live the same lifestyle as you. So yeah, it is a big adjustment. Um, but you just got to get through it and adapt and overcome and realize you're not in anymore. So no one has to listen to you. And you just got to be yourself and put yourself out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's take a step back and talk about some of the common mistakes that vets make on resumes or interviews. There's a couple that come to mind for me, but I want to know what are some of the ones that y'all are seeing first and foremost. Josh, can we start with you here?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of mistakes is military jargon. That's like the number one. Please don't do acronyms. They're not gonna. It's just gonna go right over their heads. explain what it means. And it's different from a board interview. I know being in the military, you have these promotional boards and everyone's rigid and they expect you to know all the answers. You got to be able to have a conversation. Just be fluid. Just, you're not going to know everything. It's expected to not know everything. They're going to know that. In the military, they expect you, like, you need to know every single answer. But that's, when you get out, you're not going to expect to know every single answer. So you got to be able to have the conversation, not be so rigid. A lot of times, you're upright, in the upright position. Just be real with them. They want to be able to translate your experience and how it kind of relates to the job that you're applying for. So being able to have that conversation back and forth, being able to bring your real world experience, because you have a lot of experience when you served overseas. I mean, there's when you served in Afghanistan, they brought up mine clearing, leading a team, being able to translate all that information into kind of like the civilian mindset, this job that you're going to be applying for. You got to be able to have that crosswalk. You got to be able to have that conversation. People want to hear what you have to say because you have a lot of value. Being a service member, you learn everything. I mean, at 18 years old, you're expected to lead 5-10 people into combat. That's a lot of experience. That's a lot of responsibility. And then to be out and go into the civilian world and start leading a team over a large multi-million-dollar project. They want to be able to see those leadership skills and be able to adapt and overcome what Greg brought up. So yeah.
As you're saying that, I'm remembering it wasn't last year. I think it was 2 years ago for the November summit. I got to speak to a woman who had recently exited, I believe, the Marine Corps, but I don't quote me on that one. And she was telling us about how one of the things that she did when she got out was she looked up the value of some of the projects that she had been a part of because she was in she was in water. And so she would go in and she was in charge of these giant machines and that would have to supply water for the entire company. I'm sure none of these are the right terms. Apologies, y'all. But it was one of those things where she was like, yeah, I went and looked up the value of the equipment that I was in charge of. So I could say that, hey, I was I was head of this project. I was responsible for this much money's worth of equipment and blah, 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 and people, and here's what we did. And that was something that I never would have thought of to go back and be like, okay, how much was that tank worth? How much was that thing that I kept like on the field and ready to go? Like, I thought that was fascinating and really a good way to contextualize it for, a civilian, but also highlight like she was 22 and in charge of like millions of dollars of equipment and was trying to like, show and highlight like, here's what I could do. And I thought it was a really, really, it stuck with me 2 years later. I'm like, hey, this is something you could absolutely do. Because like we talked about, that's not just highlighting your leadership, that's highlighting your responsibility level. That's highlighting, how trustworthy you are, all the different, kind of bits and bobs that you oversee. I think that's excellent. Matt, how about you? What are some of the common mistakes that you've seen or even common mistakes that you made when you were first getting out?
So I think the first one, if we're talking about like mistakes on our resume, I would say the first thing you want to do is soften your language. The way we tend to speak in the military tends to be much more active voice. It sounds aggressive a lot of the time if you just bring it out of nowhere and other people aren't speaking that way. I think Greg already mentioned it, but like the bullets laden with adjectives that are not necessary, just trying to kind of fluff up the language. Just be clear, be concise. Don't worry about sounding impressive, sounding perfect. Just try to sound clear. Try to get your point across as quickly as you can and just make it clean and crisp. Um, in terms of like the interview, while softening the language definitely does apply there too, I would say one thing that we probably aren't good at when we get out of the military is we're not used to asking questions because again, go do this thing, don't ask questions, figure it out, like I said before. But when you're doing an interview with a civilian corporation, you can ask questions. Like Josh was saying, it's a conversation. So ask questions if you don't know something. If they ask you a question, you can turn that around and say, can you clarify this? That's not a sign of weakness. It's actually, it's actually better in a lot of cases. I've been on the other side of a lot of interviews now, and I really like when people ask questions and show that they're curious or show that they've done some research on the company and are asking a relevant question on something. It lets me know that they are interested in what they're doing. They've actually done the due diligence and that there's something and they've spent enough time to really know that there's something here they want to get into.
Yeah, I like that. Greg, how about you? Do you have anything you would
Yeah, I
like to add
think
here?
the only thing I would caveat to that is unless you're applying for a government job, your resume doesn't need to be 30 pages long. You don't need to add a new entry for every time you got promoted or if you did an interpost transfer or moved jobs. Keep it short, keep it pithy because they have to go through a lot of resumes. Get to the point. The second thing I would say is like Matt was just saying, in an interview, it's okay. And I go by the mantra of yes, research the company I'm interviewing for, and then I try to be interested, not interesting, meaning I want to be more interested in what this company is, who I might potentially work for, and that sort of breaks the ice and allows for a flow of conversation and just shows that you're interested in it's showing that you have the ability to speak and think on your toes, critical thinking, things like that. So that's what I say is just relax. It's not a promotion board. You just go in there, you're just talking to someone else who came to work today. And if you made it that far, they want to see you succeed. So just relax.
Yeah. Matt, I really appreciate that call out on the fact that like in softening the language, the underlying message there is that like these are conversations. It's okay to ask questions. Because again, you're coming from a situation and from a a fishbowl, as it were, where the rules are completely different. So it's okay to get to an office setting or get to literally anything that's non-military and be like, what is happening? How do you know who's in charge? What's going on? Like that is okay to have a bit of culture shock going on. Like that is completely understandable. And I really appreciate you breaking down that different mindset because, like, as a civilian, it never would have occurred to me to be like, well, asking a question is it weakness? Of course it's not. If you don't know and you don't ask, then you're just being dumb. Just ask. It's fine. So I think that's great. I really appreciate that call out. All right, let's talk about building your network. This is something that can be very, very daunting as a military spouse, as a veteran. It can feel like you're kind of like, on an island and now you've left all of your military people, so who do you have? Josh, I want to go to you with this. How do you think that vets and military spouses can help build their networks outside of their military family?
Yeah, when I first got out of the military, active duty, I was kind of looking for my civilian jobs, and then I got on the LinkedIn, the USA jobs, trying to expand my networks. But the biggest thing, and when I first got hired on through Esri, was actually through someone I knew in the military. We worked on mapping wildfires for the California National Guard during 2020, 2021. And he was part of the Air Force, and we kind of like hit it off when we got into GIS and got very interested into the subject. And he actually got me an interview with the company that I work for now. And it's all about building relationships. I think, had I not, build that relationship, cultivate that relationship during that, a lot of times when you're in a stressful environment, you start building a closer relationship. You're like, I remember that one time it was like 30 degrees outside. It was cold. It was windy. It was wet. It was just horrible. But those where you like start building those lasting relationships, when the suck happens, right? You're in the infantry, you're out in the cold, you're not in a tent, you're not hot, but when you're all suffering together, you kind of start building that camaraderie and you start getting close to one another. But it goes beyond that. One of those, building those relationships, it goes beyond just, being in the military. It goes, when you start applying for civilian jobs, you have to have those relationships, have to have those conversations and maintain. I mean, I still talk to my buddy to this day, and he's from Kentucky, and I got people from the East Coast, and I still talk to this day. It's all about having relationships because you never know when I think I've alluded to this, you're going to run into them. You got people that, they might be a 1-star down the line, or, I have a CW5 that I talk to now on the daily. It's just one of those things you got to have to build those relationships. And it's not just being LinkedIn. Like a lot of people like to have those face-to-face meetings, right? Like being able to, I know with nowadays with the technology, everyone's distant, but you got to have, get on a phone call or go meet them in person. Like I've gone, when I got out, like, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, I went over to the East Coast and visited my buddy just cause over on the East Coast. And it was just nice to have that conversation. So when it talks to you, like now I'm going to bring a wrap it around for expanding your network, it's all about those relationships that you've cultivated in the military because they're going to help you down the line. Like you never know when you run into so and so. Like I've already ran into a couple of people on a project I was working on, and it's just good to have those relationships and working with one another and having existing ones. I mean, one of the guys, I was actually in a just 2 years ago, I was at ALC, actually 2.5 years ago. Yeah, I was at ALC, and the guy that I'm working with, he works for in Hawaii for law enforcement, and I'm working with him right now. So it's very good that to have those relationships and be able to cultivate them because you never know when you're going to run into them.
Greg, I wanted to ask you, what was this like for you? I mean, you were coming out after 22 years and trying to, build a network. What did
Yes.
that look like for you?
So ironically, what Josh is saying is 100% true, and I'm living proof of it in that the first job I got out of the military was because of a former soldier of mine worked there and knew I was getting out and spread the word. And then with Esri, the same thing. I had submitted a application to be an instructor or something, and somehow it ended up in the hands of some people who didn't know me directly, but knew someone who knew me. So the geospatial world is very small. So you are generally only 1 or 2 degrees separated from someone if you just pull that thread. But um, I suggest people getting ready to get out, go to all the job fairs you can. Or if there's something in your area that you want to do, go there and just say, "Hey, I'm Greg. I'm getting ready to get out. I want to do what you're doing. How do I do it?" It might sound goofy, but you'd be surprised. People are very receptive when met with someone who shows an interest in what they do and want to learn it. And you'll be surprised, that goes a long way. That says more than any piece of paper can say if you just raise your hand and show your eagerness. So sometimes you just got to leave that military space and go to that job fair that's on post or in the next town over. So that would be my advice.
No, I think that's really good advice. And I like the advice to not feel kind of hemmed in by like, well, I've never done this before. Well, yeah, you probably also hadn't climbed a wall for the first time you did it. You probably hadn't thrown a grenade for the first time before the first time you did it, but you did all those things. And guaranteed nothing's likely to explode at a job fair. So that's kind of nice. Um, Josh, how do you feel about this? When it comes to advice for veterans who are looking to get out, what would you tell them?
I would just say volunteer for everything. Like put your hand up. I mean, everyone's like, hey, I volunteer. I want to do this job. Just having that the volunteer heart kind of goes a long way. But also make sure that you can have those critical thinking skills that Matt was talking about, because you learn those critical thinking skills while being in the military. So, volunteer, learn. You're not going to know everything. Just soak it in and continue learning. Even when you get hired on, you're still going to continue learning. Never stop. Never, because the minute you start become stagnant, things stop, right? You gotta keep growing, gotta keep learning, learn new skills, because you never know when you might need that skill set for this current job that you're in. So yeah,
Absolutely.
that's my advice.
Matt, what do you say? If you've got a buddy that's a couple months or a year from getting out, what should they be thinking about?
Um, I would say if they're about a year or so from getting out, I would say start kind of researching companies' ideas. Start trying to reach out to people that might be even tangentially connected to that industry. I was lucky enough that my father was a customer of the company I work for now at Esri. And he knew somebody at our Boston office who got in touch with me, and he started sending me stuff over, and I started learning what I could do with this. And that was just one random connection to another, and it ends up putting me in the position I am today. So I wouldn't discount any of those kind of happenstance that you could get, and just looking for who can you make a connection with. And then, once you get out and once you start talking to people and start going interviews, relax. Don't don't be so rigid. Try to remember that everyone's just a person. You're not expected to know everything. And there's going to be people above and below you that don't know the things that you know, and that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, I like that. All right. I just want to say a big thank you to each of you, Greg, Josh, and Matt. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, sharing your expertise, as well as all of the prep work that went in on this. It is not lost on us. So thank you to each of you for joining us today and sharing. It's really appreciated.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I also want to send a big thank you to the audience members. Thanks for joining us for today's event. I hope you all have found this interesting. If anything that you've heard today has sparked your interest in Esri, I very much recommend you check out their company page on powertofly.com. I've gotten to host a bunch of Esri events, and they are all wonderful people, bar none, across the board. So if that's something that interests you, definitely check out their page on powertofly.com. That's going to be it for this session, but thanks so much, and very excited to sit back and enjoy some of the other programming we've got going on during today's summit.
All right, everybody. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.